Good afternoon. We have Abby Buboltz, one of our dietitians from our wellness program, here with us today to talk about the key recommendations from the 2015 to 2020 dietary guidelines. Thank you for being with us, Abby.
The 2015 to 2020 dietary guidelines are primarily geared towards health professionals and policymakers. Basically, they set the tone for what the recommendations are. And the recommendations are for healthy adults, and they are focused on disease prevention rather than treatment. When we're talking about nutrition from a treatment standpoint, it would be very specific to the individual that is being treated for a potential chronic condition or even an acute condition. So these guidelines are for healthy adults to lower their risk of developing. This is a joint venture of the Department of Health and Human Services and the United States Department of Agriculture. If you look at these guidelines and you see 2015, they just came out, even though the guidelines are technically for the year 2015 to 2020. The guidelines just came out, and that's why we're reviewing them now. They are evidence-based guidelines. So these are guidelines based on the current research. When the people that make these guidelines do the research, they're looking at the population of the United States as a whole and what we're over-consuming, what we may be under-consuming or lacking nutrients in, and that's where these guidelines are developed based on what we need more of and what we may need less of. Again, it may be a little bit individual to each of you, but hopefully today you can take one thing from this presentation and possibly make a healthy change. These guidelines then are the basis for the various nutrition graphics that you might see. What we're familiar with is the old food pyramid. Some of you might be familiar with that. That changed into the choose my plate, which is now a symbol that you'll see frequently with regards to healthy eating and nutrition. If you are interested in looking up more information on these dietary guidelines or what we talk about today, the website to go to is www.health.gov/2015/guidelines. You could go to health.gov and type in 2015 dietary guidelines. You'd also be able to find a wealth of information there. The key points for these guidelines are, first of all, to follow a healthy eating pattern across your lifespan. This is really important because we have different needs at different ages and different stages. So that is the overarching goal of the dietary guidelines. The other goals then are that we have a variety of foods in our diet and that we also have foods that are nutrient dense, as well as paying attention to the amount of food we eat. When we talk about variety, oftentimes if we're trying to make food changes and we cut out one thing or one food group, we end up missing out on potentially on some nutrients. So having variety in the foods we eat is really important. We're going to talk more about specifics when it comes to variety a little later today. When it comes to nutrient density, this is basically talking about foods that provide a lot of benefit for a small amount of calories. So think about something like a vegetable. You get a lot of benefit from it, vitamins, minerals, fiber, and not really much harm. So, and also a small amount of calories. So nutrient density is really important when we think about the quality of the food we eat. Not only the calories as a whole, but what makes up those calories. And then the amount is really important. The big key with amount is that it allows us to still eat foods that we like. That may not be the best choice for us, but it's within moderation and really paying attention to the portion size of what we eat. Oftentimes, this is one of our biggest challenges. The third key component of the dietary guidelines is to limit a few different areas. These areas that we really want to limit are sugars, saturated fats, and sodium. We're going to talk about each of these categories and how they impact our nutrition. One question that I want you to think about as we go through the presentation today is, when you make a decision about what to eat, ask yourself, first of all, is it good for me, or is it beneficial for me? If it is, great. If it's not, the second question to ask yourself is it worth it? If we're answering the question, is it beneficial to me, with a no frequently, then that may be a good place to start. If we are able to answer, yes, this food is good for me and beneficial to me more often than not, then most likely you are getting a lot of those nutrient-dense foods and most likely a variety in your diet. So the first food that we want to talk about, that we want to make sure we get enough of, and that the dietary guidelines are specific in saying we need more vegetables. And specifically with vegetables, we need a variety of vegetables. Oftentimes we hear about eating more veggies. Most of us need to eat more veggies, we know that. But we don't always talk about making sure that we get a variety of veggies. So first of all, we want to make sure we get dark green vegetables. Dark green vegetables are a source of vitamin K. They also may have some calcium as well. We want to make sure we get red and orange vegetables. These are a good source of vitamin A, which has antioxidant properties and also, as we know, is good for our eyesight, among other things. Legumes are, most of the time, they're going to be our beans, so kidney beans, black beans, edamame, chickpeas. Legumes are going to be a great source of fiber. And then our starchy veggies. And there are a few veggies that are starchy. They have a little bit more calories and a little bit more carbohydrates than the veggies above, but starchy veggies still have some good components. Our starchy veggies, such as potatoes, squash, have potassium. They also have fiber and also some of those other vitamins and minerals that we talked about. When it comes to veggies, 1 cup of raw veggies is 1 serving, and half a cup of cooked veggies is 1 serving. So it is important that we do pay attention to that variety of vegetables. The way to know that you're getting enough veggies is just look at the colors. If you have a colorful plate, most likely you're getting a variety of those vegetables. This is a great time of year to get in a good habit of eating veggies, since they are plentiful, budget friendly, and usually taste pretty good right now. The other thing that we know that we need to eat enough of is fruits. And sometimes we hear about fruits as being high in sugar, and so you may hear that you want to limit them. But when it comes to fruits, it's much better option to get your sugar from fruit, which is naturally occurring sugar, as opposed to a cookie or pastry or something else that has added sugar in it. So fruit can be a great tool to get the nutrients we need, fiber, vitamins, minerals. It has water content, so it also can help keep us hydrated. When it comes to fruit, the serving size of fruit may vary a little bit. So 1 medium fruit, such as an apple, an orange, a banana, is going to be about 1 serving of fruit. For melon and berries, it's about 1 cup. And for something like grapes, it's about 1/2 a cup. So making sure that we are including fruit in our day is important. However, we do want to limit the fruit juice. Fruit juice can be high in added sugars, and oftentimes we don't get nearly the benefit from fruit juice that we do from whole fruit. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you are having dried fruit as your fruit serving, watching the portion size. Dried fruit can oftentimes be high in sugar, and the portion size is about 1/4 cup. So it's very easy to overdo it on something like a dried fruit. One key guideline of the dietary guidelines is that half of our grains should be whole. Now, this would be the goal for the nation in general, but really, if we can have most or all of our grains be whole, that would be ideal. But if you're not eating all whole grains, half of your grains as whole is a starting point. So what does this mean? When we talk about whole grains, it really means that we want to limit those refined grains or the white products. So basically we're talking about the difference between white bread and wheat bread. So when you're looking at the label for any sort of bread product, the first word should be whole. If it's not, then most likely it's not a whole grain product. Packages and the marketing of foods has become very clever, and oftentimes breads will look like a whole grain or look like they're good for us or have a saying on them that makes it sound like they're good for us, such as multi-grain or 9-grain, and sometimes those are really a glorified white bread. So whole grains really means you have to look at the labels, and when you're looking at the labels, basically 1 ounce of whole grain is 16 grams of whole grain. Now there's not necessarily a way to calculate this when you're reading a label, but there is a little yellow symbol that signifies whether a food is a whole grain. You may have seen this on cereal boxes. Sometimes it will be on the side or on the back, but many bread products have this little yellow rectangular symbol that says that it is whole grain or that it includes a serving of whole grain. So we're going to take a look at some labels of whole grain foods, and we're going to look at if these are whole grain or not. So first of all, let's talk about A. A is just a regular bread, and the first ingredient is wheat flour. This is actually not a whole grain. The first word is not whole. It is wheat, which sounds like a whole wheat, but it's actually not a whole grain product. B, a tortilla, the first ingredient is whole wheat flour, so this would be a whole grain. Same with the dried cereal. Whole cornmeal, since the first word is whole, that means it's a whole grain. It's a little bit tricky because it's corn and not wheat flour, but it's still a whole grain. The cracker also is a whole grain brown rice flour is the first ingredient. And then the last one, the roll, unbleached enriched wheat flour is actually not a whole grain. If something says it's enriched, typically it's not going to be a whole grain, so just keep that in mind. One of the benefits of whole grain is that they really are chock full of a lot of nutrients. They have fiber, iron, zinc, manganese, niacin, phosphorus, B vitamins, selenium, vitamin A, copper, and folate, just to name a few. And whereas refined grains maybe are enriched with B vitamins and iron. So really there's quite a difference between those two. So the next area that we're going to talk about is fat-free or low-fat dairy. Now, I want to caution against fat-free everything, but when it comes to dairy, fat-free or low-fat is the recommendation because of the saturated fat content. We know that an increase in saturated fat does increase our risk of our cholesterol going up and our triglycerides going up, and therefore our risk of heart disease. So saturated fats we do want to limit, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. But that's why the recommendation is for fat-free or low-fat dairy. Now, this doesn't mean fat-free for all of our foods. Many snack foods that are fat-free are higher in sugar or higher in sodium. So it does not mean we have to eat fat-free for everything. The recommendation, though, is that our dairy be a skim or a 1% version of dairy products. The benefits that we get from dairy are calcium, phosphorus, vitamin A, vitamin D, B vitamins, protein, potassium, zinc, choline, magnesium, and selenium, all which are helpful things to make sure that we're getting enough of. Another key component of the dietary guidelines is making sure that we're getting a variety of protein foods. Protein is essential for making sure that we maintain and repair our muscle mass, and making sure that we get protein spread throughout the day. Protein helps keep us full, and so it can be a helpful component to have at our meals. Oftentimes, the places that we forget to have protein or we lack protein are at snacks or at breakfast time. So making sure that we're just being consistent with our protein throughout the day. And protein can be meat, seafood, poultry, which is oftentimes what we think about as protein, but protein can also be eggs, legumes, nuts, and seeds as well. So there are a variety of ways to get protein. It's just a matter of being diligent with having protein at meals and snacks and varying the type of protein. Now we're going to switch gears from talking about things that we want to include in our diet to categories that we maybe need to limit a little bit. These are ones that have been found that most of us, or a majority of the population, may overdo at times. So we're going to talk about saturated fats, added sugar, and sodium. So when we talk about fats, this is a great graphic from the American Heart Association that shows us the spectrum of fats. When we talk about fats, they really are on a spectrum. Some fats are better for us than others, and it's making sure that we're having more of the healthy fats and less of the unhealthy fats. So when we talk about fats, the healthy fats, or what is noted here as the good fats, are the monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. We know that these fats can be helpful for lowering our bad cholesterol levels and reducing our risk of heart disease and stroke. We do need fats, and so because we need fats, it's important that we get the right kind of fats. The mono and polyunsaturated fats are usually seeds, fatty fish like tuna or salmon, and avocados. The next category of fats, as I mentioned before, is the saturated fats. I don't really like the word bad here. I don't like to say that any food is bad. It's more so a matter of how much. But saturated fats, we do know, can put us at risk of heart disease and stroke if we have too much in our day. So saturated fats mostly come from animal sources. They do come in some of our oils, but usually they're found in our meats, our butters, and especially our cheeses. So when it comes to saturated fat, the big key is watching how much we do, how much butter we're using, how much cheese we're using, and how fatty the meat is that we're choosing. So saturated fats is really just something that we want to limit. The one that we want to stay away from completely, if possible, is trans fats. Now, this one is noted as the ugly ones, or the ones that we should stay away from. Trans fat is found in our fried foods, oftentimes our baked goods. It's found in stick margarine and in some types of oils. So now trans fats, it can say on a label 0 trans fat, but it can have up to half a gram of trans fat. So the way to know that something has trans fat is by the word hydrogenated oil or partially hydrogenated oil. If you start looking at labels, you will find quite a few labels that have hydrogenated oils in them. So hydrogenated oils we know are not beneficial for us. So we really want to limit these or try not to do them as much as possible. If you do want more information on healthy fats and unhealthy fats, the American Heart Association is a great resource and has some nice graphics and also recipes. If you do want more information on this, you can see here that the website to go to is heart.org. And there is some great information there regarding fats. When we talk about saturated fats and how much we should have, the recommendation is that we have less than 10% of our total calories. So if we take a 1,500 calorie diet, just for example, 150 calories of that, which would be 16 grams of saturated fat per day. This, if you start looking at labels, can be a pretty aggressive goal, but this would be the goal. The main sources of saturated fat in the United States are cheese, meat, or dishes that contain both. If you think about it, we have quite a few dishes that may have meat and cheese. So saturated fat is natural in those animal sources, but it also can be added, as in the case of our packaged goods. The other area that we want to limit is added sugar. Now, we've probably heard about this. Most of us have heard about decreasing the amount of sugar in our day. And the reason for this is sugar really is added, and it's not something we need more of. And oftentimes it's more calories, and calories that are not necessarily beneficial. It kind of goes back to that nutrient density component that we were talking about before. So with sugar, we want it to be less than 10% of our total calories. Again, for a 1,500 calorie diet, this is going to be about 16 grams of sugar per day. When we start to look at how much sugar is in some of the foods we're eating, such as yogurts, sweets, snacks, even snacks that don't necessarily taste sweet, beverages, and condiments, our sugar can add up quite fast. The national average is about 13% of the total calories. However, that means many of us are eating more than that as well. And that is 13% of the total calories doesn't mean that we're eating the right amount of calories. So if someone has more than 2,000 calories, they're getting quite a bit of that added sugar. So just keep that in mind when you look at that stat. This chart has a variety of different names for sugar. This chart has 16 names for sugar, but I've heard of lists of 56 names of sugar. So there are quite a lot of terms for sugar, and it's just something to be aware of when you are looking at that label. With sugar, it may be manufactured or natural, but regardless, we know that we eat too much sugar, and it's most likely something that many of us should start paying attention to or decreasing if we can. The other component that we want to decrease is sodium. The last presentation that we had was on sodium, and so we aren't going to focus on this too much, but what I do want to point out is that the recommendation is less than 2,300 milligrams per day. If you go out to eat, oftentimes some of those dishes may have half or almost all of your day's worth of sodium. But we also find sodium in quite a few other foods. So mixed dishes, protein foods, so our meats, our cheeses, grains. A lot of our bread products actually may be a little bit higher in sodium. Some of this has to do with the processing of them. Snacks and sweets, vegetables if they're canned, beverages. If you start looking at the label of different beverages, sometimes you may be surprised with the amount of sodium. A lot of our condiments and sauces and salad dressings are going to have sodium as well. So it's really important that we're paying attention to where that sodium is coming from. This is a little bit of a review, but most of our sodium does not come from the salt shaker. It actually comes from packaged and processed foods that we're eating. In fact, usually it's about 70% comes from the other foods we're eating. So just important to pay attention to where our sodium is coming from. That is all that I have for you today. Thank you for watching, and have a good rest of your day.